Hi, my name's Laura McAllister. Laura, L-A-U-R-A, McAllister, M-C-A-L-I-S-T-E-R. I live in Seattle, Washington. I've been working in the field of early childhood development for 32 years now in a variety of capacities. Everything from preschool teacher to live-in nanny to college professor. I'm currently the co-executive director of a consortium of child care centers. My history comes from a lot of different places. After I had worked in child development for a number of years, I decided to become a center director because I felt that if I was the person in charge of a child care center, well, that child care center would be perfect. That child care center would be the best possible quality. That child care center would serve subsidized children at the top level of NAUIC accreditation. And I had worked in accreditation for a number of years, and I had worked in quality programs. But I hadn't had my own center that I was entirely in charge of. What happened to me when I became a center director was a really rude awakening. It isn't simply that the person who is in charge of the child care center needs to understand child development, needs to understand teacher training, needs to really get what it is that children need in this world to grow into happy, healthy individuals. What I found when I was a center director is that I didn't know how to run a business, and that child care, besides needing to be an excellent educational environment for children to live in, because they live in these child care centers, it also needed to be a really good business. And there was nothing in my teacher training background, there was nothing in my master's degree or in my 2 bachelor's degrees that taught me anything about how to run a business. And I was blindsided by those pieces of running a business, and frequently those were the parts of running that first child care center that I was the director of that got pushed to the side, got done at 5 o'clock on a Friday, or simply didn't get done until they became a huge problem that needed then a crisis intervention. And I was really surprised by that. From my position as a college professor and from my position as a teacher, I just sort of assumed the person in charge had all the power and that they could make it right. But then when I got to be that person in power, I realized I was not prepared for all of the things that were needed. I was prepared for a lot of it. I had a vision for children and teachers and families. I had a vision for what children needed. I had been well trained in child development, but everything else blew me out of the water. Most center directors in the United States last about 2 years. And I could see why when I was a center director, because it's a burnout job. Nobody knows what you do. A lot of the things that you do, you have to keep very confidential. A lot of personnel issues are horrible problems, and you're involved in a lot of people's lives that take the ability to hold things both close to your heart and far from your heart at the same time. And that balance was difficult for me. The book side of things, the budgets and the math and those parts of it were not something that intimidated me. That's something that a lot of center directors have difficulty with. I enjoyed the budgets. I enjoyed making the budgets work. It was everything that got to that piece that was more problematic for me. For a center director to only last 2 years means you don't ever really get good at it. It takes 3 or more years to really understand any job or position. And the fact that most center directors burn out within this 2-year cycle means that in our field, we're chronically poorly administered. And when I sort of realized that for myself, I decided to not be the center director anymore and to go back into teaching and go into consulting. And I did that for 5 or 6 years. I worked in a couple of accreditation processes. I worked very closely with an organization that was devoted to closing the achievement gap for low-income children of color. And it was through those experiences that I had after I was a center director that I came to realize there really has to be a better way, because keeping doing what we've been doing in our field isn't getting us what we need. It isn't getting us happy, healthy individuals that are prepared to do better by the next generation. We're just sort of placeholding generation after generation in ways that, for me as a dedicated educator, was really kind of frightening to think about where we were going in our field. So I started doing a lot of deep thinking. I started working, like I said, with a couple of different organizations, and I saw what could be done. What could be done well. What could be done better. And I started talking with colleagues about ways to fundamentally change the nature of childcare. What is broken in our finance system, in our teacher training system, in our administration of childcare centers, large and small? What is broken about all of these elements that lead good directors to run screaming out of the office with their hair on fire? And with some colleagues and my current co-executive director, we were able to come up with the idea that we needed to build strong infrastructures together. And we started looking at different alliances and different organizations that do what's called shared services, to see what types of models are out there and also what type of models aren't out there, and to try some new things. So about 8 years ago now, after many long walks and many long talks, it seems like the list of people we spoke to had about 24 people on it from all over the country. We decided to form a consortium of childcare centers dedicated to being better together. We decided that if we really unified, and not just aligning our missions and our values and what everybody wants in the world, but actually unifying our resources, pulling our resources and talents, our finances and our brain space together into one big pot, into a consortium of strong childcare centers, that really we would be better together. And we did a lot of business plans. We talked to a lot of different people. We did all kinds of different budgets with all sorts of different configurations of small centers and large centers, of centers that serve predominantly low-income children, centers that serve high-income children, together in the same budget. We did bilingual programs, we did government-sponsored programs, we did private paid programs. We just kind of did this whole mishmash of budget after budget after budget to kind of bring it together, to figure out that, wow, when we unify and we have 8 to 10 centers of various sizes with a similar mission, when we bring all that together, there's enough. There's enough resources. There's enough time. There's enough space. There's enough talent in the talent pool. Or there's enough folks looking at that talent pool and saying, we need this other thing that we didn't quite know about. So it really was an idea that came to fruition out of seeking a different way. It wasn't out of desperation. A lot of alliances kind of come together because somebody can't pay their rent and somebody else helps them, or they unify because there's a crisis afloat. And in our situation, the crisis was that we were fed up as people who had worked in this field for a really long time and not seeing enough progress, or seeing a little bit of progress for the few families that could be served in a high quality, culturally relevant community, but only those few families. And after a few years, sometimes those centers, even those best centers, would go to the wayside. When I was working in the accreditation program, I helped a number of programs get accredited, only to see them close their doors within 2 years. Well, how do we have this system of saying these are our top 5% of quality centers in our country, and those can't make it economically? Something was horribly wrong, and I wanted to go further and sort of figure that out.